Our next speaker loves chickens and her Vespa, but loathes it when you're at a picnic and the wind changes and someone didn't pick up their dog shit and suddenly you can smell it, so you have to move. I think I'm going to add that to my shit list as well. Let's get to know her even better. Please welcome Zoe Crocker.
Hi everyone, I'm Zoe. I'm an illustrator and I'm also a senior motion designer at Never Sit Still, which is a Sydney-based motion studio for those of you who don't know us. I wanted to start by thanking Node for having me here today and basically giving me the space to talk about myself for 30 minutes. That's really cool. My talk today is going to tell the story of why I nearly left the industry and what kept me here, and I guess some important things that I learned along the way as well. I haven't had the easiest time getting to this point in my career. When I finished high school, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do, and I wanted to do heaps of different things, so it actually made it really hard for me to decide. But I eventually settled on design because I loved to illustrate, and I thought that maybe design could be a way I could use those skills to get money. But I wasn't really falling in love with the idea of becoming a motion designer until we had our first introduction to motion graphics. This was the first animation I ever made in After Effects. It's pretty rogue, but when we were making these, I noticed that some other people in the class were getting stuck on left to right, and I kind of thought maybe this is something I guess that is coming to me more naturally and something that I could use to differentiate myself from the crowd. And also I thought motion was really cool and was an opportunity for me to use my illustration skills maybe even more than just design would. So from that point on, I pursued motion any chance I got in uni, and by the time I got to the grad show, I had maybe 4 or 5 solid motion pieces in my portfolio. This was me at that grad show, and actually about a minute before I was offered my role at Never Sit Still, I was messing around with a good friend because our posters were next to each other and we were told no one from industry was going to be there for another half an hour. But Never Sit Still was early and there was a group of people waiting in the corner watching me take seriously heaps of stupid goofy photos patiently, and then they came over to me and asked, are either of you guys Zoe? And I was like, oh yeah, that's me. And I was super embarrassed even though I didn't know who they were at the time. And Mike DeSetto, the director and founder of Never Sit Still, gave me his business card and basically offered me a role. And I didn't know, I was kind of like, oh, okay, cool, yeah, sweet, I'll come in for an interview. And it wasn't until I got home and I saw the website and the work that they were doing that I was like, oh shit, okay, this is a really legit opportunity. So yeah, getting the job was actually the easy part. I was really lucky there, but after that was when things started to get hard. In February 2018, I became the 4th person to be employed by Never Sit Still and also the first woman on the team. In uni, I thought I was pretty fucking good at motion design, especially compared to a lot of the cohort. So I thought I would crush it when I came into the industry. But I quickly came to face the fact that I was absolutely shite compared to the standard that Never Sit Still was putting out. And it was taking me 15 to 20 rounds of internal feedback just on my work before they would even show it to a client. And even though I was getting amazing mentorship from Mike and the team, it was definitely tough love. And that combined with my own lovely dose of perfectionism, every day when I left work, I felt like this. It also didn't help that there was an awkward adjustment period when I started to suddenly having a girl on the team. And don't get me wrong, Never Sit Still has been amazingly supportive and we have a great gender split. But when I started, there was a feeling that people were maybe watching themselves a little bit around me, or just that things had to change, and clients were actually the worst for this. I would be in meetings and they would ignore me entirely, wouldn't even look me in the eye, even if I was actually the main creative on the project. And that was hard, and I guess I sort of felt like I was intruding in this space. And I'm sure that a lot of women have felt this, so I just have this slide in because we shouldn't, because we're not. Anyway, feeling like I sucked and was letting the team down was hard, and I had a lot of anxiety around that, and I was bloody exhausted. At the time, I was still living at home with my parents, and some days I felt so unwell that I could barely stand in the morning, and I had to get my dad to drive me to work. And this started happening 2 or 3 times a week, and if it wasn't for my dad, I probably would have had to call in sick so many more times. So shout out to my dad, thanks Dad. I was also in physical pain a lot too, like I could barely finish my lunch, and we had a team member at the time, Mitch, who would finish my food for me, so thanks. But yeah, overall that was a pretty huge combo for making me want to give up, and I would think about my old job that I was doing before with nostalgic fondness and think, why am I subjecting myself to this? Maybe I'm like too lazy to keep up with having a full-time job, period. I was ready to quit, but then I thought, oh, it's such a good opportunity that I can't just quit now. I have to wait a little bit, so I'm not kind of dogging Mike for giving me this opportunity. But unfortunately, it never came to that because I had 2 breakthroughs around the same kind of period of time. The first one was a career breakthrough, and this one gave me like a little but crucial confidence boost in my own abilities. Maud, a cool design agency in Sydney, were pitching to rebrand Sydney Dance Company and wanted a video to assist the pitch. And like for anyone who's familiar with working on pitches, you would know that there's not a lot of time. I think maybe I had 3 or 4 days, but also every single other person of the Never Sit Still team was so busy, and despite being a super green junior, I was the only one free to work on it, and I had to just make it work. So needless to say, I was shitting myself. But I wasn't flying blind. The concept behind the design was that the logo would act as a stage for holding content, and that it could also move and appear in different lockups like a dance. So that was a really good jumping point. Maud had also given us some beautiful designs in a sequence, and all I basically had to do was figure out how to get from one layout to the next, whilst also giving a tone and voice to how the brand would move in motion. But this was the thing that really made a difference for me. Until this point, I had only ever worked on projects that didn't have music at all, or ones that went into motion and then the client changed the track like 3 times. We had to retime them again and again, or things that didn't even need music in the first place. So having the track locked before I started animating made something really click for me in my brain. And this is kind of cheesy, but the only way I can describe it is that motion is kind of like dancing for design, and it's so much easier to choreograph a dance when you have music. So animating this project all of a sudden felt easy, and it was honestly like the music told me exactly where I needed to move things, or how fast it needed to go, or how much energy it needed. And I honestly felt like I was possessed by someone who knew what they were doing. Like when I reflect on it, I was like, I didn't make that. But I was actually having so much fun making it too, even though I was still exhausted and in pain. And I remember for the first time feeling super, super proud of the first render I made. But I was still a junior, and it still had to go before Mike before it could go out to client. And I was terrified that he was going to tear my baby to shreds, and I was going to get notes and notes and notes. But he didn't, and this was actually what he said. I kept this because it was such a crucial moment to me. I kept a screenshot. It was the first time I'd ever received like such positive feedback straight away. And it was also the first time I was the only one who ever like touched the animation at all. Like I had Mike's direction, but I was the only one who touched it. I even kept the very first render that I showed that got this feedback, because in my head I was like, I wonder if I ever get asked to talk at something one day, I will need this. So here it is, that render side by side with the final tightened up version. The second breakthrough that I had was more to do with my personal life, but I would quickly come to realize the impact that it has and still continues to have on my career. In 2019, I had surgery and was officially diagnosed with the chronic illness endometriosis. Let me explain it. It affects 1 in 9 women or people with uteruses to all different degrees of severity with no specific explanation as to why. I could almost guarantee I'm not the only one in the room right now who has it. So what is it? Trigger warning, I'm very quickly going to talk about periods, and I'm really sorry if this makes you uncomfortable, but same. Endometriosis is when a lining similar to the endometrium, also known as the lining of the uterus, grows in places where it isn't supposed to. It's actually been found now in every single part of the human body, even sometimes growing on people's skin. And like having a period once a month, at least, the tissue blisters up and breaks off. But unlike having a period, there's nowhere for it to go, so it causes internal bleeding. And that extra loss of blood, along with a bunch of other things that are still being researched, can cause any of the following symptoms. Everyone is different. Not everyone experiences all of these symptoms, but for me, the chronic fatigue is especially bad. And it turns out that anxiety is a huge aggravator of my symptoms. So you can imagine now it suddenly made sense as to why I was absolutely suffering through the start of my career. And having that clarity was really a huge turning point for me because it's meant that I knew what I was dealing with and that I could take action to, I guess, help myself. But that being said, it was really hard to accept what I needed to do. Our industry kind of glorifies working on personal projects and stuff, and I would see people who I looked up to doing all this amazing work outside of hours, and I would feel like, I want to be doing that too. I want my side project to be featured on Vimeo. But that wasn't going to work for me. The way I would describe burnout is like those old-fashioned bombs with the round bomb and the long fuse. And every time you're working above and beyond and extending yourself, you're burning that fuse slowly down towards that bomb. And whenever you rest properly, that fuse can regenerate. But because of my health, my fuse is already a lot shorter to begin with, so it doesn't take as much to basically reach the end of it. I needed better work-life balance. But Never Sit Still was built on hard work and long hours. This was our old manifesto, and I was honestly a little bit nervous about approaching them to tell them that I needed to do things differently. Because what if that wasn't going to function at Never Sit Still? Where else would I go? Like I said before, the industry is notorious for long hours and putting in work because we have fun jobs. So I was scared that there wouldn't be a place for me now that I'd finally realized how much I love motion as well. And it was kind of a sad thought. Like I was like, oh, is this the end? Like, am I going to have to quit after all of that? But I've been really lucky at Never Sit Still. They have always been so supportive and have allowed me to create boundaries that I needed to put in place in order to manage my ability to function at work and actually still have a life outside of it as well. And I was able to create those boundaries because I was very transparent with them, and you can imagine it was something quite awkward to talk about, like very personal to bring up with an employer and be like, hey, so I'm going through all of these things and also you need to make accommodations for me. But it's kind of built trust and understanding, and I think it's honestly kind of helped create a genuine shift in the company too, and our manifesto has even changed to reflect this. But people battling with chronic health are not the only ones who need to make boundaries at work. Everyone does. So I'm going to talk about this because I think every time someone brings it up, it keeps it front of mind and we just improve things a little bit more each time. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the things that I do and I feel are important to stop yourself from overworking and burnout. And I found this quote that I liked, especially the bit at the end where she says, "Too many people wear their burnout as a badge of honor," because I think our industry definitely has that, and it's something that needs to change. So these are the 5 boundaries that I'm constantly reaffirming with myself and setting where I work as well. And they're simple, I think, almost and kind of obvious, but somehow still hard to do. And if you guys do want to start a union or something, I'll be at the after party, so... This to me is the most crucial, and it's probably one of the hardest things to do, so these are the 3 things I do for myself to kind of help facilitate it. Fighting the guilt of leaving on time. Everyone kind of would know this guilt of leaving early. So I'll give you your reason right now that's good enough excuse, and it's looking after yourself and having a healthy work-life balance is a good enough reason to leave. Everyone has the same choice to do that, so do it. With some strategies to stay focused, you can get through a lot in one day. I start every morning with a list of everything that I need to make, including make the list, so I get to tick something off straight away. And I make sure I'm always doing something on that list for the hours that I'm getting paid. And that kind of helps because when I get to the end of the day, I know that I did everything that was possible. And this one, ironically, I wrote so much for this, which I feel like goes against it. So I'm just going to say, make decisions quickly and then leave. And it's really helpful because you don't waste time. This is simple and it ties very closely into boundary number 1. Once you're gone, you're gone. Shut down, try doing something completely different, and rest. I love this. I always offset my hours when I can. So when I'm asked to work late, I'll say, sure, but can I come in at 10 tomorrow? Or sure, but can I have the next afternoon off? And Never Sit Still is really accommodating with that, which I think is great. I do believe if you can't pay someone for the overtime, offsetting that time should be the bare minimum because that time is your life and your recovery. I try to take 2 to 3 days a week from working from home, and I think that's really helpful because it means in lunch or during those commute hours, I can do chores or do physio or nap even. I do that a lot in lunch breaks. But yeah, it just kind of helps me recharge and also means that my evenings are totally free to rest and recover, no chores after work. This one I struggle to do with heaps still, but ultimately it's better when you're healthy and rested because you perform better, you're nicer to be around, you're even more creative. So if you get sick leave and you feel bad, just use it. Don't wait to get to the end of your tether. Just like have some time to recover. But I understand that fear is one of the biggest reasons as to why people don't firmly assert their boundaries where they work. They're scared that the boss won't like it and will just hire someone who will do what they're asked and who will do the overtime. Or for studios, there's even a fear of losing clients to, like if they say, we shut down at 6 and we can't work on your project, that they'll just use a different studio next time. But we weren't born to do this kind of work in order to live, and we weren't born to be able to work at 110% all the time. I don't have a solution to capitalism yet, but why are we pushing ourselves for companies with literal fuck tons of money who want us to work around the clock just to make a video? But before anyone who disagrees with me wants to jump on Twitter and say, oh, this chick at Node doesn't know what she's talking about, I also want to acknowledge that I know that this is also true. External circumstances or awesome opportunities with not so awesome timelines can come up, but the management that I've been doing means when these chances come, I have enough energy in the tank to put towards them, and that makes a huge difference. I don't have an unlimited well of creative energy. Sometimes my symptoms flare up and make it really hard for me, but it's so much more than I had before. In 2019, I was a finalist for Emerging Designer of the Year. I didn't win. I was nervous that by setting those boundaries, I was subsequently slowing down my career and how fast I would be able to progress. So to be recognized for this award was absolutely validating that I wasn't throwing my career away in exchange for work-life balance. And in fact, I would say this happened because of putting those boundaries in place, not in spite of it. The same goes for this. Because of my health and making sure that I was always taking time to rest, I had to be efficient as fuck with everything that I did to get here, which I would say progressed me even faster. I'm going to finish up today by sharing 2 cool projects my journey has led me to working on. The first project that I ever led, and the second, maybe the coolest one I will ever get to. Co-assemble. For this, I designed it, and I also animated a large majority and set the tone for kind of the rest, or I guess directed the rest. The brief was to create a cool and energetic launch video for Co-assemble, which is an online training tool. We were working with an agency on the job, and they briefed us saying that they wanted to push the Co-assemble brand into a cooler space by slightly tweaking the color palette, so from what you can see on screen, and just using the shapes and stuff in a cooler way. So this was my first attempt at style frames, and I didn't have a lot of time. I also didn't have a lot of confidence, especially when I was rushed, and I was really struggling to find a balance between reference and brand and the brief. And I don't think anyone in the studio was particularly confident with this when we went into the meeting. And when we presented it, the agency agreed that it needed work, and they actually encouraged us to push it even further away from the brand to create a really cool, edgy standalone piece, push the colors more, go a bit more wild with the design. So I kind of felt after this pressure that I really needed to prove that I could do this project to bring it, because this was my first opportunity really to lead something from scratch. So this was my second attempt at the designs, and internally we were feeling pretty stoked about this because it matched the brief we were given by the agency, and it looked like it would be a super cool one to animate. We did actually some quick R&D to help sell it in because the next meeting was direct to client, and when we presented this, the client went pale on the call. Like, she looked like she was sick to tell us that she hated it because of how much work we'd put into it, because we'd basically just taken it way too far away from their brand and we needed to get it back. And at that stage, the agency wanted to take over, but I was determined to be the one to crack it, and I had a pretty good idea of what to do after that meeting. So this was the next pass that I did, and this was the sweet spot. This one the client absolutely loved, which was a really just an amazing feeling, especially knowing that I didn't give up and hand it over when I could have. So yeah, this is the final video of these boards. Here's an example of a cool project where I needed to put in that extra burst of energy and time to get it done. But this was a super cool one, and dare I say a dream project, and I was super lucky enough to get to lead it. Adobe came to us at Never Sit Still to create the splash for the 2022 After Effects release, so a new version of these bad boys. And they had a pretty open brief. They basically wanted us to represent the power and possibilities of After Effects in a short animation from which a static moment would live on as the splash artwork. And as far as anything else, that was pretty much all they had to say. Like, they wanted us to show a list of techniques that are to do with animation, like transformation, effects, compositing, automation, and stuff like that. But they kind of didn't have much else. It was really up to us. The only other little detail that they gave us that was helpful was that they wanted it to have a sort of a lighter feeling overall than some of the old ones, because for those of you who are familiar, they've kind of moved into having that white pop-up square instead of the deep purple here. So we decided to start with just finding a concept for it, and this was the one that we ended up coming up with. And it was basically to do with the fact that After Effects' range is so broad and people use it to make all kinds of different things for all stages and purposes of animation. So we wanted to sort of showcase what everyone does through figuring out a way to mix all of these medias together and have them accumulate into this style frame at the end that would be the final splash that's basically showing all of the styles working together in harmony, because that to us is After Effects. For this project, we had only 2.5 weeks from kickoff to do the whole thing. So pretty crazy, especially considering we delivered it and then it didn't come out for a few months after that, but anyway. We started by developing the overall concept and putting some restraints, which we ended up like breaking anyway. And we found stock music and imagery, which we could only source from Adobe's library, so that was really hard, just being limited to the one place for searching for that stuff. And of course, we started with the splash because that's the bit that would live on, and then we moved on to the other assets. So this is the splash frame that we designed, and I pulled out a bunch of kind of cool little details that may or may not be obvious. But the main core thing of this design is the fact that in the center of it, we have a stack of all the different types of keyframes. So linear keyframe, rove keyframe, toggle hold keyframe, and obviously the eased keyframe, kind of that hourglass shape. And from this, we sort of decided that this kind of core concept which ties everything together, which is that linear keyframe diamond, and that appears in every shot throughout the video, because that one, we thought, well, without it, animation is not possible. That is the default keyframe, like ignoring expressions for the moment, but like you need that keyframe to kind of make things move. So we thought that would be a great hero for our piece. So yeah, I'm going to show the process video now and kind of talk a little bit how we developed a storyboard for something where there was nothing in the air. But yeah, so we started by opening up to the studio for just any ideas to do with motion. So we got anyone who was free, just wrote down ideas or sketched us thumbnails. And anything that didn't have a thumbnail, we then sketched one for it. And I sketched them actually all on separate pieces of paper so that we could reshuffle them physically in space and reorder them. So we had so many ideas, and I would put them into a storyboard and be like, oh, John, the creative lead of the studio who was working on this with me closely, I would be like, what do you think about this, John? And he'd be like, yeah, okay, what about, I think that would transition nicely into that scene though. And we'd be like, oh yeah, true. So we were the two of us switching boards around and kind of until we had something that reflected a decent enough storyboard to use, and we were like, cool, this is it. Let's pick some art styles to go with each scene. And so we picked all these art styles that we loved to put onto each scene, and then from there we had to use all of those art styles or all of those elements in the final splash frame. So that was maybe one of the biggest challenges, was mashing it all together in the end. But I think it ended up working pretty well, and we were able to strike a really nice balance between everything. So yeah, just let this video play out and move on. There's going to be some credits at the end of this, so read really, really quickly. Shout out to everyone on the screen right now. I thought I would explain all of the conceptual thinking behind each scene before I show the final video. So the first scene is basically about the power of 3D in After Effects. So this whole thing was built in After Effects 3D, and it also represents an awakening because that hero diamond is lighting up, bringing light to the scene and kind of bringing motion into all the shapes around it. The second scene was about 2D keyframe finesse, classic shape, trendy geometry, a mastering of keyframe and easing, and it also has a reference to essential graphics in that kind of stack where there's a bunch of them all next to each other. The whole like idea of making one and then using it for all the other ones that look slightly different. Scene 3 was a little joke that I am obsessed with, and like no one laughs at this, but I was like, oh, it's a still life, but it's moving. It's not still at all. Thank you. It shows basically the integration of photography and illustration. It's basically like a collage style, and also shows transformation in the way that they change between the different photography or illustration. Scene 4 was a quick one to talk to the integration of Adobe Animate and working and comping with live footage. I guess like cell animation as well. And in this one, we started to bring in little tidbits of the Adobe UI into the project, so like as little decorative elements, and we kind of continued that throughout. In this one, I don't think the videos are animating, but that's okay, we'll just move on. In scene 5, this one was about animation for typography and print style, and it basically inviting graphic designers into motion. And again, you can see a couple of details in that scene. One of the barriers that we had for this scene was that we couldn't really use words, even though we did, but we had to try and make them more textural because English is not the only language of people who are using After Effects, so we had to kind of use it more texturally. Scene 6 is one of my favourite scenes in the whole video because of the shy layers guy that appears. But the other concept around the scene was around automation and essential graphics as well, having that keyframe diamond open up, and in its light, everything behind it starts to automatically animate. But yeah, that shy layers guy, seeing everyone getting embarrassed and then closing all the layers, it's probably my favourite moment in the whole video. Scene 7, oh, okay, we're going slow here, sorry guys. We're back. This one was about showing an illustration style and all about distortion and effects. Every leaf in the moment where they snap is being warped or coloured or bulged, or it's using it like a different effect from the distortion panel. Like basically we used every single one except the ones that are so fugly, like we couldn't make it look nice in the scene. And then scene 8, this was about integration with the partner app of Cinema 4D and how you can bring in puzzle mats and cameras and stuff into After Effects. And because it was about dimensions, we had basically a bunch of dimensions flying past, and the timeline layers are actually kind of warping out through these dimensions and kind of wrapping around. And then the final scene, this is the same as the splash, so I won't say too much here, and I'm just going to show you guys the final video now. My English teachers in school really drilled into me that a good conclusion should summarise all your points clearly, but I was never good at English, so I'm just going to tell you what I hope you got out of my talk, and then I'm going to bounce. Maybe my story or my personal journey and my experience with Never Sit Still is an example of how slowing down your work and to have more time for life doesn't mean you're stalling your career or delaying achievements and progress, and maybe it will encourage you to do the same. Maybe you run a studio and it's made you reflect on your working conditions and support for your staff. Maybe it's inspired you to set your own boundaries where you work, and hopefully inspire those with the power to be more receptive to that. Extra awesome if it's given you some ideas of how to do that. Maybe it's made you realise that you work with people who need to function a little bit differently, and that that's okay. Or maybe for those of you who weren't in the mood for anything too deep, you just thought it was cool to get some insights into those projects. Whatever it is, I hope you enjoyed, and thank you for having me.